I used to think I had the perfect life. My name is Maddie Harper, and I was married to Charles for nearly 10 years. We lived in a beautiful house in the suburbs, had two wonderful kids, Olivia and Ethan, and, at least on the outside, everything seemed picture perfect. I dedicated myself to our home and children, making sure every birthday, holiday, and school event was flawless. I loved my family deeply. I thought my sacrifices mattered. Charles, on the other hand, was charming in public and cold in private. He had this way of making everyone think he was the perfect husband and father, while quietly dismissing my efforts. I ignored the small things at first, the way he criticized my cooking subtly, the way his eyes would roll when I suggested family plans. I thought it was normal. I thought it was love. It wasn't until the day I found the first text on his phone that I realized how wrong I was. It was just a single message, innocuous at first glance, from a woman named Vanessa. "Can't wait to see you tonight." My chest tightened. My stomach dropped. I confronted him immediately, my voice trembling, trying to hide the panic I felt. "Charles, who is Vanessa?" I asked. He smiled, that infuriatingly calm smile, and said, "Oh, that's just someone I met through work. Don't worry about it." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to be the woman who trusted her husband completely, but something inside me refused. I started noticing the little things, the way he criticized my cooking subtly, the way his eyes would roll when I suggested family plans. I thought it was normal. I thought it was love. And then came the divorce papers. I was blindsided. I thought we would fight for our marriage, at least talk it out. But Charles had a plan that left me with nothing. No house, no savings, not even the security of a steady income. He claimed I had mismanaged finances, that I was incapable of supporting our children, all the while smiling like a man who'd won a cruel game. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor, the paper spread around me, Olivia coloring quietly at the table, Ethan playing with blocks. I felt hollow. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every dream I'd put on hold, it meant nothing. And worse, Charles left with that smug certainty that he had won. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. Instead, I let the silence swallow me. I let them think I was broken, weak, and defeated. I didn't realize then that it was exactly what I needed to start the quiet revenge that would take everything back. Because what Charles didn't know, and what he would soon learn, is that you can't leave a woman with nothing and expect her to stay powerless. You can't humiliate her, dismiss her, and assume she won't fight back. I was about to start a journey he would never see coming. But I didn't realize that was just the beginning of the nightmare. The days after the divorce papers were served were a blur. I felt like I was walking through a fog. People I thought were friends avoided me, and neighbors whispered as if my failure was some sort of scandal. Even Charles acted like nothing had changed, like he hadn't just ripped my world apart. I spent hours staring at the ceiling at night, Olivia and Ethan asleep in their rooms, wondering how everything I had worked for could vanish in a single signature. I replayed every conversation, every moment of my marriage, searching for signs I had missed. The truth was brutal. I hadn't missed anything. He had planned this. Every late-night meeting, every excuse, every fake smile, it had all been calculated. I was angry. Furious even, but the anger was heavy, and at first, it crushed me. I tried to cry it out, tried to scream into pillows, but nothing worked. I had no one to turn to, no safety net, and worst of all, my kids were too young to understand why their father had become a stranger. Olivia clung to me, asking questions I didn't have answers for, while Ethan seemed quieter, more observant than usual. Then came the first spark of resolute. I realized that if I wanted my life and my children's life back, I couldn't wait for someone to fix it for me. I had to fix it myself. It started small. I spent hours in my old office, poring over financial documents I had saved from our shared accounts, receipts, and tax records. I knew Charles had always been sloppy about some of his finances, hiding little things here and there, assuming I'd never notice. But I did notice. And now I would use that to my advantage. I reached out to Emily, an old friend and former colleague who had always been sharp with numbers. I hesitated at first, afraid to admit just how bad things were, but something about her calm, analytical way of looking at things made me trust her instantly. "Maddie, you're not as powerless as you think you are," she said when I finally confessed everything. "He may have taken the house and the money, but you still have information. You still have the kids, and you still have brains. That's more than enough to turn this around." Her words lit something inside me I hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. Not the fragile, fleeting kind, but a quiet, simmering determination. If Charles thought he had won, he had no idea what was coming. I began making lists, hidden assets, potential weaknesses, every detail I could find about his business dealings, social connections, and the people who depended on him. I started reading legal guides, learning about strategies divorced women use to reclaim power. And slowly, methodically, I built a plan. And yet, for all this plotting, there was still the hardest part, keeping it all a secret. Charles assumed I was broken. He assumed I would disappear quietly. He had no idea I was already taking the first steps to turning the tables. But even as I started this quiet, deliberate revenge, I realized one thing. It wouldn't just be about the money. It would be about everything. His pride, his social standing, the lies he told, and the way he had tried to erase me from my children's lives. I was ready to start. And what I didn't know was just how much of Charles's own mistakes would make this revenge easier than I ever imagined. But I didn't realize that the first move would be the most dangerous. The first step of my revenge wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches, no courtroom battles, just quiet observation and careful documentation. I started paying attention to everything Charles did, the people he interacted with, the small inconsistencies in his life that no one seemed to notice. I discovered his first mistake almost by accident. While reviewing some old bank statements I had secretly kept, I noticed a transfer to an account I had never heard of. A substantial sum, far more than he ever mentioned. It wasn't just a hidden account. It was evidence that he had been lying about our finances for years. And that account, I realized, could be the first piece of leverage I needed. I didn't act immediately. Acting too soon would tip him off. Instead, I started collecting everything. Emails, receipts, even casual conversations that could be documented. I became a silent observer, a shadow in my own life recording the man who had taken everything from me without a second thought. At the same time, I had to maintain a facade for the children. Olivia and Ethan still needed me to be their safe place, their constant, even as I quietly prepared to strike. It was exhausting, smiling at breakfast, helping with homework, pretending I hadn't been shattered by the divorce. But it was necessary. They were my reason for patience, my reason for planning. Then came the first real victory. I learned through a mutual friend that Charles had been cutting corners in his business, embezzling small amounts here and there, thinking no one would notice. Emily and I went through the details meticulously, creating a timeline, documenting everything. We weren't doing this to ruin him recklessly. We were doing this to reclaim what was rightfully ours and to expose the arrogance that had led him to believe he could cheat me and get away with it. The first time I saw him falter, it was almost satisfying in a quiet way. At a charity gala, one of his business associates confronted him privately, over something I had carefully leaked through the right channels. I watched from across the room, invisible, as his confident mask slipped for the briefest second. No one else noticed, but I did, and it gave me hope. I realized revenge didn't have to be explosive. It could be slow, methodical, and deeply humiliating. Every secret revealed, every lie exposed, would chip away at his carefully constructed life. And I was patient. I had to be. But patience had its own dangers. One wrong move, one slip of evidence, and Charles would discover my plan. He was clever, after all, and arrogance made him dangerous. I reminded myself constantly. Quiet, careful, invisible. These were my weapons. I began planning the next phase. I needed more than just hidden accounts and shady business dealings. I needed proof that would stick, that would shake his world without risking mine or the children's safety. And that's when I discovered something that made my blood run cold. A secret so carefully hidden that if it ever came to light, it wouldn't just ruin Charles financially, it would shatter the reputation he had built over decades. But I couldn't act on it just yet. Timing, I realized, was everything. One misstep and the entire plan could collapse. So I waited. And I watched. Because I knew that when I finally moved, Charles wouldn't see it coming, and the fall would be catastrophic. But I didn't realize that someone else was watching me too. I thought I could move unnoticed, that my quiet revenge would be invisible, but I quickly learned that nothing stays hidden forever. One evening, as I reviewed some documents in my small makeshift home office, I noticed a subtle change. Emails I hadn't sent were marked as read. Documents I thought were private seemed to have been accessed. My stomach dropped. Charles wasn't as oblivious as I had believed. He may have underestimated me, but he wasn't stupid. That realization was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. I had been playing a dangerous game, and now I knew that one careless move could expose everything. I became even more meticulous. Every action had to be calculated. I started encrypting files, using different devices, and meeting Emily in secret locations. We developed code words, methods to share information without leaving traces. I felt like a spy, a shadow living in my own life, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And then came a complication I hadn't expected. Vanessa. She was everywhere Charles wanted her to be. Dinners, charity events, casual weekend gatherings, and her presence made everything harder. She wasn't just a girlfriend, she was a threat. A reminder of everything Charles had taken and a symbol of the life he was flaunting without me. But Vanessa had weaknesses too. Through careful observation, I realized she wasn't the clever, untouchable woman Charles made her out to be. She had ambitions, secrets, and insecurities that mirrored his own. That knowledge gave me a small thrill, like discovering a chink in a supposedly impenetrable armor. Meanwhile, the children began to notice small things too. Olivia asked why her father never came to parent-teacher meetings anymore. Ethan, in his innocent 6-year-old way, asked if Daddy had forgotten about them. Each question felt like a knife twisting in my heart. I reassured them, smiled, and played the part of a strong, unbroken mother. But inside, I was already plotting. The first direct action I took was subtle. I sent a carefully crafted anonymous tip to one of Charles's business partners, hinting at discrepancies in his accounts. It wasn't overt, just enough to make him question his finances and trust the wrong people. It was small, but it worked. Within days, Charles was on edge, questioning meetings and scrutinizing documents obsessively. I watched him from a distance, invisible, insatisfied. I realized revenge wasn't about immediate destruction. It was about control. Every move, every whisper, every secret revealed at the right moment would weaken him gradually, until he no longer knew who to trust or where his power came from. But the more I acted, the more dangerous it became. I could feel eyes watching me, unknown forces sensing that I wasn't as powerless as they had assumed. And I knew deep down that the next step had to be bigger, riskier, and that it would change everything. The moment I decided to escalate, I didn't realize that this next step would bring me closer to a truth that I hadn't been prepared for. The first major move had to be perfect. I knew Charles would never see it coming, and that's exactly how I wanted it. Emily and I spent weeks planning, analyzing every detail of his life, every meeting, every business deal. We weren't reckless, we were surgical. The opportunity came when Charles was preparing for a high-profile charity gala. He was desperate to impress investors, sponsors, and the social elite. That night, I slipped into the role I had been perfecting for months. Invisible, composed, untouchable. I wasn't there physically, but my actions that evening would hit harder than any confrontation ever could. Through Emily's contacts, I leaked subtle evidence that one of Charles's major clients was being defrauded. Not enough to cause legal trouble immediately, but enough to plant seeds of doubt. The whispers started fast. Charles was distracted, defensive, and growing paranoid. His once perfect confidence began to crumble, and I watched every detail unfold from my hidden vantage point. It was intoxicating seeing him falter. He had taken everything from me, our home, our security, our future. And now, silently, I was dismantling the very life he had built. But revenge is never simple. The moment I realized my plan was working, I also realized how close I had come to being exposed. A mutual acquaintance almost mentions my involvement, and I had to think quickly to redirect suspicion. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding my veins, but I stayed calm on the surface. The key to my strategy was patience and precision. Meanwhile, the children continued to anchor me. Olivia was growing curious, noticing subtle changes in her father's behavior. Ethan asked questions that made me tighten my chest with a mix of pride and guilt. Protecting them while striking back was a balancing act I hadn't anticipated, but I wouldn't allow fear or doubt to stop me. Then came a shocking discovery. Charles had been hiding more than just money. There were contracts, investment deals, and offshore accounts that even his closest associates didn't know about. And buried in those documents, I found the key to not only leveling the playing field, but gaining the upper hand entirely. It felt like a storm building inside me, a mix of rage, relief, and determination. I wasn't just planning revenge anymore. I was orchestrating a complete takeover of the narrative, a quiet but undeniable reclamation of what had been stolen from me. I reached out to Emily, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling with a mixture of fear and excitement. "This is it," I said. "The real game begins now." And just like that, I crossed the point of no return. Once I acted on this new information, there would be no turning back. Charles's world, and ours, would never be the same. But I didn't realize that someone closer than I thought had already started watching me, and the next move would put everything at risk. The more I uncovered, the more I realized that revenge wasn't just about money or public humiliation. It was about protecting Olivia and Ethan. Charles had always prioritized his image over them, and I couldn't let that continue. Every move I made had to safeguard their future, even while I dismantled his world piece by piece. It started with small things, subtle adjustments to their schedules to keep Charles from interfering, extra attention to school records and medical appointments, and carefully tracking any changes in his visitation patterns. I wanted to ensure that my children were safe, emotionally grounded, and shielded from the chaos that revenge could bring. At the same time, I continued to press forward with my plan. Emily and I had mapped out a series of strategic moves that would expose Charles's hidden assets and question his credibility with business partners. Every revelation had to be timed perfectly, or it could backfire. It was like playing chess against a man who believed he was unbeatable, and I relished the challenge. Then came a moment that shook me. Olivia, in her innocent 9-year-old way, asked me why Daddy never seemed to care about us anymore. Her big eyes searched mine, and I felt my resolve harden. I couldn't let my revenge make her feel like she was losing her father entirely, but I also couldn't let him manipulate their lives. "Sometimes people make mistakes, sweetie," I said gently, "but Mommy will always be here for you. Always." Her small hand squeezed mine, and I made a silent vow. Everything I did, I would do for them. They deserved a mother who fought, not just for herself, but for their safety, their happiness, their future. Meanwhile, Charles' behavior started to unravel. He was restless, defensive, and increasingly paranoid. A business associate mentioned discrepancies I had planted, and he reacted in ways that exposed his arrogance and impulsivity. It was satisfying seeing the man who thought he was untouchable beginning to crack under pressure. But just as I thought I had control, a new complication arose. Vanessa, Charles's new girlfriend, began taking actions I hadn't anticipated. She wasn't just a passive player. She was ambitious, trying to secure her place in his life, and perhaps even in his business dealings. I realized that I couldn't ignore her. She had to be understood, neutralized, or used as a piece in my plan. I began observing her, learning her patterns, her weaknesses. Slowly, the pieces were falling into place. I could see how both of them, Charles and Vanessa, could be played against each other. It would require patience, timing, and nerves of steel, but I was ready. One night, as I tucked Olivia and Ethan into bed, I realized just how much I had changed since the divorce. I was no longer the woman who felt powerless, defeated, or invisible. I was calculating, focused, and dangerous, but only in the way that justice demanded. And yet, even as I plotted the next move, a chilling thought crossed my mind. What if Vanessa wasn't the only one watching me? I didn't know it yet, but someone else had begun tracking my every action, and the next revelation would test everything I thought I knew. The next discovery hit me like a punch to the gut. I had been digging through old financial records, piecing together a puzzle Charles thought no one could uncover, when I stumbled upon something he had gone to extreme lengths to hide: offshore accounts, complex investments, and contracts so cleverly disguised that only someone with patience and persistence could uncover them. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the screen for what felt like hours, heart pounding. Every line I deciphered revealed not just money he had hidden from me, but proof of lies, manipulation, and betrayal that went deeper than I had imagined. This wasn't just about getting back what was mine. It was about exposing the truth he had worked so hard to bury. Emily and I pored over the information, building a timeline of transactions, linking them to assets and properties that weren't listed anywhere legally accessible. We were uncovering a secret empire Charles had carefully hidden behind a facade of wealth and charm. And the best part? The more we found, the clearer it became that he had overextended himself. He was vulnerable. I knew then that I had more power than I ever dreamed of. Not just to reclaim my life, but to take control of the narrative, to shift the balance of fear and respect. Charles had underestimated me, assumed I would crumble, and he made a fatal mistake. But secrets like these are dangerous. One misstep, one hint of what I knew, and he would fight back with everything he had. I had to be careful, deliberate, surgical. Every email I sent, every meeting I scheduled, every step I took had to be invisible. And yet, even with all this evidence, the hardest part was maintaining the facade of normalcy for the children. Olivia and Ethan still saw me as their anchor, their safe place, and I couldn't let them feel the storm brewing behind the calm. I smiled at breakfast, tucked them into bed, answered their endless questions about Daddy, while secretly preparing to hit him where it hurt most. Then came the first real betrayal I hadn't anticipated. Vanessa. I discovered that she wasn't just a passive participant in Charles' life. She was manipulating him, too. She had ambitions, desires, and secrets that even he didn't know about. And in that revelation, I saw an opportunity. If I could leverage her own schemes, I could gain even a greater advantage over Charles, all without raising suspicion. Emily warned me not to underestimate the danger. They're both playing a game, Maddie. Don't get distracted by Vanessa. She could ruin everything if you slip. But I wasn't distracted. I was calculating. Slowly, methodically, I began weaving a plan that would pit Charles and Vanessa against each other, revealing their true colors to the people that mattered most. I was no longer just fighting for money or for justice. I was fighting to reclaim my dignity, my children's security, and my life. And for the first time in months, I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt since the divorce: control. Yet, even as I plotted the next move, I had no idea that Charles had already started noticing the edges of my shadow. And when he finally realized what was happening, the consequences would be explosive. I knew that if I wanted to win, I couldn't do it alone. That's when Emily and I took the plan to the next level. We needed allies, people who could help us navigate legal loopholes, gather evidence discreetly, and manipulate Charles's social and business circles without raising suspicion. The look on his face when he realized that the quiet, powerless woman he had discarded was the mastermind behind his undoing was more satisfying than any words could convey. I had taken everything back. Not just money or property, but dignity, control, and the knowledge that I was no longer anyone's victim. Charles had underestimated me, and that mistake had cost him everything. As I hung up the phone, I sat quietly, letting the reality sink in. Olivia and Ethan were playing nearby, unaware of the storm that had passed, and I felt a deep sense of closure. I hadn't just survived, I had won, in the quiet, calculated way I had always known I could. And though revenge had been sweet, it wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a new life, one where I and my children would never be powerless again. But even as I celebrated, I knew one thing for certain. Some victories leave scars, and the memory of betrayal never truly fades. It took months for the dust to settle after everything. Charles's empire was in ruins, his reputation tarnished, and Vanessa had disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. For a long time, I didn't know whether to feel relief, satisfaction, or emptiness. The revenge had been meticulous, perfect even, but it came with its own weight. Sitting in my living room one quiet evening, watching Olivia and Ethan laugh and play, I realized that the true victory wasn't in what I had taken back, it was in what I had reclaimed for myself, my dignity, my strength, and the sense of control over my own life. No one could ever take that away from me again. I thought about how far I had come, from the woman who had felt powerless, trapped by a marriage that betrayed her, to the woman who had quietly, methodically turned her world upside down and rebuilt it stronger than ever. The process had been exhausting, painful, and at times terrifying, but it had been liberating. There were moments I still replayed in my mind. The first time I realized Charles had hidden accounts, the thrill of seeing him falter at a gala, the satisfaction of watching Vanessa expose herself without even knowing I had orchestrated it. Each memory reminded me that careful planning, patience, and determination could turn even the deepest betrayal into triumph. But more than revenge, I had learned lessons I would carry forever. I had learned the importance of vigilance, of trusting my instincts, and of never underestimating my own strength. I had learned that being quiet didn't mean being weak, and that power could be reclaimed in ways that were both smart and undeniable. Most importantly, I had learned that my children were my anchor, my reason for fighting, and my motivation for becoming stronger than I ever imagined. Olivia and Ethan had endured the chaos around them, and they would grow up knowing that their mother was not someone to be underestimated. As I tucked them into bed one night, I whispered a promise I intended to keep. No one would ever make us feel powerless again. Not Charles, not Vanessa, not anyone. And as I sat alone later reflecting on the past, I realized something profound. Revenge had given me more than just closure. It had given me confidence, clarity, and the courage to shape the life I truly deserved. I had been left with nothing after the divorce, but through patience, strategy, and unwavering determination, I had taken it all back. And now, for the first time in years, I felt free. We started by reaching out to a trusted attorney, someone who understood the subtle art of reclaiming assets and using evidence to shift leverage. Every conversation was coded, every document encrypted. We weren't just fighting for money anymore, we were building a network, a web that would eventually trap Charles in his own lies. Then there were the social angles. Charles thrived on appearances, on the respect and admiration of the people around him. I began planting seeds of doubt among his colleagues, subtly hinting at discrepancies, making them question his judgment. It wasn't slander, it was truth, carefully curated to expose his arrogance and carelessness. And Vanessa? She became the perfect unwitting ally. I learned her patterns, her desires, her insecurities, and started nudging situations so that she would inadvertently betray Charles's trust. Every carefully placed word, every calculated meeting made the cracks in their relationship visible. Soon, Charles's perfect facade began to crumble piece by piece. At home, I continued to shield Olivia and Ethan. They remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing around their father. But I noticed subtle changes. Olivia asking more questions, Ethan showing curiosity about why Daddy seemed so different. It reminded me why I was doing this. Revenge wasn't just about me anymore. It was about giving my children a safe, honest, and secure life.